Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. I'm Molly Herford. I write all about fitness, health, nutrition, outdoor adventure, and all that fun stuff when I'm not trying to actually get outside and do said outdoor adventures.
And I'm Peter Glassford. I'm a registered kinesiologist and an endurance coach, and this week we are down at the Ellen Noble Quest.
Yeah, Ellen Noble's cyclocross quest, which has 18 young women who all came to Western Mass to figure out how to crush it at cyclocross. And I'm going to add, these are not learning to ride girls. These are young women who are already freaking crushing it in cyclocross and just kind of want that extra edge for this season. So look out, everybody.
Yeah, this is definitely training camp, so it's been very good.
Yeah, exciting times and exciting guest for us today. We're obviously quite busy trying to, get all this stuff done while we're at the camp, so we're going to keep this intro short and sweet. Today's guest is one of my absolute favorite guests and humans. I think we've had him on this. I think this is only his second time on, but I talk to him all the time because I'm constantly bugging him for advice on both nutrition and training and also career because he's, a writer that I very much admire. So today we have Matt Fitzgerald talking about his new book, the 80-20 Triathlon Training Guide. For those of you who are familiar with Matt Fitzgerald, he also came on to talk about his last book, The Endurance Diet, I think last year now. And then you might also know his name from the 80-20 running book. Mm-hmm. That he came out with, years ago now. The 80-20 method's been around for a really long time.
Yeah, and the racing weight is probably one of his more popular. A lot of people seem to know racing weight. It's obviously when you can talk about someone getting down to racing weight, and nutrition is always trendy, and losing weight's even trendier. So I think that one did well for him. But we often refer to brain training. Is that his?
He's got brain training for runners.
Yep. For runners, and then How Bad Do You Want It is also his. So he has two sort of sports psych mental training type books, and both of those are not textbooky, right? How Bad Do You Want It is, I think, the more recent one, and it reads quite well. It's got a lot of case studies, which I really like, and I think for anyone who's trying to figure out, okay, well, what is this mental training, it's almost better sometimes to see this person was doing this was the problem they were having, and then this is sort of how they had this breakthrough from a mental perspective, right? It's interesting to see training and stuff too, but this is, sort of how the paradigms get shifted. And so that book is really, really cool. One of our favorites, and we've referenced that a few times over the last few years.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was really fun kind of chatting with him today about this whole 80-20 thing, especially with regards to triathlon, because it can be super confusing. So Peter, can you kind of give the 30-second, what is 80-20 training?
Well, we've had a few different podcasts, and we'll link to all of Matt's books, and we'll link to the podcasts that are sort of related if you do need to sort of, or want to brush up on your 80-20 or polarized training concepts. But if you recall back to, who did we have on with 80-20?
Steven Seiler.
So Steven Seiler
who wrote the intro to this book, actually.
So he's big on polarized training. And then did write the intro and commends Matt at sort of making these concepts more applicable and then also sort of easier to understand. We had Steve Neal talking, and he was more on the, if there is a debate, he's more on that sort of middle ground training or tempo training. And then we had Mr. Sweet Spot, as I call him.
Please stop calling him that. Frank Overton.
Who's, I can never remember his name after I say Mr. Sweet Spot. I could tell you his name anytime, but if I say Mr. Sweet Spot, it scrambles my brain. So Frank is really good because he was sort of part of the development of Sweet Spot training, which is sort of, again, the other side of the coin. It's sort of a middle ground intensity. It's not super hard. It's not race pace. It's sub-race pace, I guess you could call it. But you get a lot of work done because you're sort of working moderately for an extended period of time. So 80-20 training basically proposes the idea that 80% of your training should be done at a low intensity, and we talk about what low intensity is with Matt today. And then 20% should be at a high intensity, and we talk about the various ways that can be described. But essentially, you could think about it, 80% of your training should be under maybe the breathing threshold, so where your breathing becomes noticeable. And then 20% you should be breathing quite heavily is essentially the idea. And there's a lot of different concepts within that. You know, Steven Seiler was on and he talked about some of the different ways that we divide that up, right? Because it's not always evident. Heart rate has a lag time. Not every sport has power.
Swimming is just kind of weird.
Swimming's different for sure. How do you do that? What's the other concept I'm thinking of? Do the recoveries count? You know, because when you start thinking about how much time that is, it's actually a lot of time to be breathing heavy, right? If you think about 10 hours a week, 2 hours of those weeks, you have to be breathing really heavy, right? So while it might be like, oh, this low intensity, this is too easy. Well, 2 hours of a week, you have to be really, really going hard. So there's a lot of concepts in there that this is more of an overarching like seasonal approach to training. And when you start talking 3 sports, as is the case with triathlon, there's a lot going on there, right? There's a lot of concepts and different ways that we apply it. Again, Molly mentioned swimming. You know, we don't obviously or usually use heart rate as much. So you have to get into your paces. And then running, you know, how are we monitoring running? Are you using pace? Well, what if you're on a hill? So there's a lot of different questions people have, right? And how do you even set the thresholds that determine that? So
yeah, we get into all of that.
We do. So that's sort of what 80-20 is the same as the polarized sort of idea. And I think the other thing that's interesting in the triathlon application is that most triathlon is not like full gas racing.
Totally.
You know, I think most people would agree with me on that. It's not a short track race. It's not a mountain bike race where you're just going as hard as you can up a hill.
I mean, a sprint would be, but...
It is. They're certainly shorter, but that's not what most people think about. And certainly, if you say triathlon, what word do you think of? Ironman.
I don't even want to talk about it.
So Ironman is a very moderate type of training. So we then get into this debate of, well, what about specificity, right? So then we talk about, Matt, about, you know, periodization and planning your training to get more specific as you get closer to the event. But also the possibility that even going really hard over this triathlon race pace might be a good idea a lot of the season, right? So there's lots of really cool ideas there, and I think if nothing else, we also talked to Matt about a variety of subjects.
Yeah, and before we get into that, I should also add that if you want to hear the entirety of this episode, you are going to have to head to wideanglepodium.com/donate.
Because it is the donor drive. We are in it.
We are in it. We're deep in it.
This is the Wide Angle Podium donor drive.
Yes.
This is our podcast network.
Yep.
They're the ones that support us, support many of your favorite podcasts, The Slow Ride, CX Hairs, We Got to Hang Out, Bike Shop CX.
Yes. And so I mentioned this with Matt because we have one of our pieces of bonus content. So each show has a bunch of bonus content. And if you actually donate, you get bonus content from everybody. So one of ours is sort of a 15-minute interview with Matt Fitzgerald talking about his basic nutrition principles that he talks about in racing weight and the endurance diet and sort of what he thinks is like the most important things that you need to know.
Which is, he has a lot of things to say about that because the original racing weight, we're talking probably 20 years worth of researching books related to nutrition.
It's a really, really good, I mean, it's short, but there's so much information packed into it. So I highly recommend that piece of bonus content. And to get to it, you have to donate. So anyway, Wide Angle Podium Network keeps us on the air.
What's the address for that Wide Angle Podium if someone wanted to donate? wideanglepodium.com/donate. And what do they get if they do that in these 2 weeks of donor drive?
In these 2 weeks?
This is a time-limited offer.
Yeah, till August 31st. There's a bunch of bonus content from all of the different shows. We've got some PDFs. We've got some extra episodes. There are Arrow race pins. There's some t-shirts. There's some other swag. There's tons of good stuff. You can do it for... You can do a recurring one that's only $5 a month or, $20 a month if you're feeling frisky. We'll take it. More is always better. But you can also now do a one-time donation that still counts towards you getting the bonus content. It used to be that if you did a one-time donation, no bonus content for you. But now, boom, bonus content. So every little bit helps. Like I said, it really helps us keep this show going and get new microphones when we accidentally smash ours when we're driving, which, may or may not happen with startling frequency.
Well, and I think ultimately, I think back to that CX Hairs episode I've now mentioned about 15 times, right? And this was now probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, 3 episodes ago. Who were on these shows? I can never remember names.
Matthew Vanderpool.
So this guy won some world championships.
Yeah, he's pretty good.
Right.
And Christopher Blevins?
Yeah, Blevins was on there. younger guy, very successful, one of the most talented bike riders in North America, if not the world, just in how much he can do on a bicycle. And that interview was tremendous. And even with all my experience as a bicycle racer, rider, and coach, like there was takeaways in there that definitely are worth $5 a month just for that one episode.
Did you even donate to CX Hairs and not to us,
100%.
Peter?
100%. I tried to just send it to that guy and just one of
Here,
them.
Blevins, you seem like you need $5.
Blevins, are you hungry?
Okay, well, let's get into this episode before you start like making him a sandwich to mail. I don't even know where we'd mail it.
I don't know where Blevins lives.
Okay, anyway, enjoy this.
I should have listened because it tells you in the episode.
Oh, jeez. Enjoy this episode with Matt Fitzgerald, everybody. I saw something on Twitter where you were doing some kind of crazy running thing, and I'm blanking on what it was.
There were 2 last year, and that's what those 2 books I referenced are about. So yeah, I did. I ran 8 marathons in 8 weeks last spring, just all over the country, and so that was one deal. And then I spent the summer in Flagstaff training with a professional running team. Just as this middle-aged guy who never been a professional runner, just kind of threw myself to the wolves and saw what it would do for me to kind of live the entire elite lifestyle.
Oh, cool.
It was cool.
And I remembered. It was like 2 weeks ago you had tweeted something about running 100 miles in a week, all slow if that's what it takes. Did you end up doing that?
Well, the reason I have that, I mean, it's funny because I think half the people or some of the people who saw that tweet assumed like I've never run more than 40 miles in a week or something.
Right.
I've been into the 90s before, and always with a fair amount of intensity. But it's funny, last year was the best running year of my life, and then this year has just been decimated. Like, I've always been injury prone. I got injured on December 31st, and have just not been healthy all year. And the injury I'm dealing with, it affects how fast I can run more than how much I can run. So I'm just like trying to find ways to stay motivated to keep at it. And so trying to hit 100 miles is, it's funny, like, because as soon as I put out that tweet, I tweet the groin again, and now I'm actually I've been running like 4 days now.
Oh no.
Story of my life.
Yeah, it's funny. I was just talking to Simon Marshall earlier today, the guy that wrote The Brave Athlete, and we talked about the injury prone and how to mentally deal with that. So yeah, I've been talking about that all day. But enough of that. Should we dive in here?
I mean, that's all good, yeah. But I mean, that's maybe even a segue. Like, do you feel, in your own experience, based off of that, obviously you're more like 100 to 0 rather than 80 to 20. But do you feel like, as far as injury risk, that's something that in the past maybe you've done more of, like more intensity than the sort of 20%, and then that's where these injuries have come from? Or do you think it's aging, or?
It's none of the above. It's, some people are just injury prone. It's really a form of talent. Durability. It is. Durability is talent. Mm-hmm. And it's a huge part of the recipe for success in endurance sports. You can be, natural speed is a talent. A naturally high aerobic capacity is a talent. Trainability is a talent. All these things are genetically rooted, and so is durability. Now, anyone can go and do stupid things, but there are some people who do stupid things in their training and just don't get hurt. Mm-hmm. And then there are people like me who, if I just utter the words plantar fasciitis, I get it, and so, yeah, when I was younger, I wasn't any more injury prone. I'm no more or less injury prone now, but I did do some stupid things. But, I'm not a stupid person, so I kind of I quickly figured out, okay, I'm not going to do that again. And even when I stopped doing any of the stupid stuff, I still got hurt all the time. So it's just, it's just the body I was given. And, when I'm healthy, it's because I'm lucky. It's just, I get on a lucky I know what to do. I know all the things I can control, and I control the controllables. But like last year, it was a relatively healthy year, and I can't point to anything at all. It's like, oh, here's my formula going forward. It was a lucky year, unfortunately. That's just.
I think you're right. I think we don't actually think about the injury proneness in terms of that stuff. But yeah, if I think about it, I'm like, okay, that guy's naturally talented. So wouldn't it make sense that someone would be naturally more injury prone than others?
Yeah.
Well,
and then go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I actually have been, I think probably my only talent, like I always describe myself as pretty moderately talented as far as cycling especially, but is I think I just can continue, oozing blood and, cut everywhere and just keep going, and then it doesn't really affect me. But I think I don't know if that's the recipe for elite performance.
It affects our laundry habits.
It does, but it is. I always list that as sort of my only talent or skill is just that. And, I never, even when I have like tension or pain or people have IT band and all this stuff, like I think it just is below, I don't know if it's below my level of consciousness or I'm lucky or whatever, but yeah, I don't know.
I envy you.
Yeah, right.
Well, again, it makes for moderate performance, I think, but at least I can show up at most things.
Yeah.
All right, so we're talking today about the 80/20 triathlon book that you have. It comes out in September, right? September 18th, I believe.
Yeah, that's the official release date.
Very exciting. So you've written on 80/20 before. So I guess for people who aren't familiar with that concept, can you give us kind of the cliff notes of 80/20?
Yeah, so there's some confusion because there's an people who are in the business world are familiar with an 80/20 rule. This is a different one. It comes from the work of an exercise physiologist named Steven Seiler, who's an American based in Norway. And he kind of a number of years ago now rigorously studied or quantified how elite endurance athletes train. And he found that across disciplines, runners, cyclists, triathletes, swimmers, you name it, they all pretty much follow this approximate 80/20 intensity breakdown, where about 80% of their training is low intensity and the other 20% is moderate to high intensity. So that's an interesting pattern because it wasn't always that way. And of course, all of these individual endurance disciplines kind of evolved independently. So, in biology, they have this concept of convergence, where if there's an optimal solution to some problem that affects living species, it will tend to evolve independently, like the so-called camera eye design that we have evolved independently several times on Earth because it just works for sight. And so the idea is that you wouldn't see all of these sports converge on this 80/20 breakdown unless it wasn't sort of the optimal way for endurance athletes to train. The obvious next question is, okay, if it works for elites, does it also work for recreational athletes? And people who are A, less talented and B, training less. And there have been controlled studies done to answer that question, and they have shown that yes, what works for the goose works for the gander as well.
Yeah, and it's very hard in this day and age, right? Because everyone's in cycling, at least there's Sufferfest and Zwift and all these things that
I was just thinking how popular like the high intensity interval training, CrossFit-y, boot campy stuff is now too.
Yeah, which is all built around that 45 to an hour type window that most of us, I guess, have for training. So what you're proposing though is that people might take those 5 workouts they have in a week and do only a portion of that time as intensity, but do it as harder than what they would maybe do in those 40-minute Sufferfests.
Yeah. So, it's an interesting question. I get this all the time. Like, okay, what's the minimum threshold for training volume where the 80/20 rule applies? Scientists haven't looked for how low can you go? Like if you're training just 1 hour a week, is it still best to do 80/20? I doubt it. But there was one study done with club level runners who they were running on average about 35 miles a week, which is not a ton, and even they at that volume, that's less than an hour a day of running. Even they improved more on an 80-20 breakdown than they did with more intensity.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and we've had Marco Altini and we've had Steven Seiler on, but Marco did a sort of experiment on himself. He's from an HRV app, HRV for training, and he did, I don't know if you've read his article, but
yes,
sort of an N=1 on his marathon running and just running generally, and that's what he found. He always sort of was running at this moderate pace, and then he had to slow way down, and he had great success with that.
Yeah.
Now, so I've also heard of the 80-20 rule in terms of nutrition, right? Like that's a pretty common one that gets tossed around where like if you eat 80%, well, you kind of have this 20% to play with. And I mean, I've heard like 85-15 and that kind of stuff. So
right.
Do you think that kind of came from like a similar, I guess, background, or is that just totally random and separate and it just happens to get brought up in sports nutrition sometimes too?
Yeah, it's conceptually very different because on the diet side, what the 80-20 rule there really is saying is that there's such a thing as good enough with your diet. Like the difference between, good enough and perfect is it's not worth worrying about with diet. Whereas the 80-20 rule in endurance training is saying this is the optimal way to train. Like if you want to not waste your time, take however much time you're willing to invest in the sport. Like if you want to get the best use out of it, it's really not permission to waste some of your time. It's really just a rule for avoiding wasting your training time as an athlete.
We got to figure out some kind of like acronym for the different versions of 80-20 and business and food and training. Keep them all separate. Okay, so you've had 80-20. You've had an 80-20 book out on running. So why come out with one on triathlon now?
Yeah, well, I mean, there was kind of a demand for it.
Yeah.
Like, I started with running. I'm a runner / triathlete myself, but I was a little more in the running world in recent years, and there are a lot more runners. So I guess it kind of made sense to start there. But once that book was out, there are also a lot of triathletes out there who would ask, does it apply? Can you make an 80-20 triathlon plan for me? So, as a writer, I don't like to tread familiar ground too much, but I knew I was going to have to do a follow-up. Part of the reason I chose a co-author for this one, David Warden, is that I was having trouble getting excited to do another spin. Just from a creative side, because I'm always like full of ideas, and you can only write 2 books at a time if you're me. so I was always putting it off. I thought, well, what will get me excited about this is bringing in some fresh blood, and David Warden is a Utah-based triathlon coach who I partnered with to create online 80-20 training plans that are sold through Training Peaks and Final Surge. And he's really complimentary to me. David, I'm more of kind of the free spirit, and he's like the master of the spreadsheet. So we made a good team in terms of partnering on these training plans. So I proposed, why don't you want to collaborate on an 80-20 triathlon book? He was all for it. So that got me excited about doing it. And then I'm really glad we did. It's a different book than it would be if I did it all my own. And it actually does feel very fresh. I just went through like final edits, just trying to see if there's any embarrassing random typos in there. And I'm really proud of how it turned out. It's just not, it does not feel, just from my own perspective as an author, like it's a rehashing of same burger, different wrapper. It's not, It's not, not that at all.
Yeah. I'm actually pretty sad that this book didn't come out a year and a bit ago when we were training for Ironman. This would have been very useful. So
yeah, well, that's the pressure I was feeling. People like you saying like,
yeah, come on.
Exactly.
Well, and it's interesting, definitely for the swimming portion. Like I basically had to learn how to swim in a year. So that would be 2 Julys ago, I guess now.
Yeah.
Through till, I guess, the end of July last year was when we raced Ironman Canada. And so that's what I definitely found. Like it was sort of just getting enough conditioning up that I could swim the duration of time and then just a little bit of speed, like so that I got used to moving, turning over fast enough. And I found that like race pace TT type effort was just, I don't know, I found it awkward. I think maybe as a non-swimmer even more so, but it was sort of like the pace I could actually maintain and then building that endurance, I guess, and then just like well past what, your 50s and your 100s basically.
Yep.
For me. And maintaining that form at that high turnover and high speed. And I found that sort of just kept raising that comfortable pace and worked really well.
Yeah. Yeah. The thing that's so annoying about swimming for those of us who come to triathlon from backgrounds in either cycling or running is just how technique intensive it is. You'll go to the pool, because if you're an experienced cyclist or an experienced runner who gets into triathlon, you feel like, hey, I'm a fit guy, I'm in shape. And then you go to the pool and some, middle-aged guy with a big old belly hanging out over his trunks dives in the pool and just schools you because he's super efficient.
And the grandmothers are in the next lane over, just like somehow beating him. And
Yeah, we actually should have gotten my dad in the pool with you, Peter. It would have been a good time.
Yeah, he
would have crushed
that
you.
type of person for sure.
It's okay. He doesn't listen to this, so I can say that and he won't get that.
So do you feel like then that fits the sport of swimming then better or more so than even running or? I mean, I don't even know if that's the question I want to ask, but with the technique limiter that a lot of triathletes would have in swimming, did you feel like it lent itself well to the 80-20?
Yeah, well, I mean, what the research has shown is that if you just look at swimmers, competitive swimmers, the elite level ones, they too are doing the 80-20 thing, and they're doing it because it also works there too. So in terms of, building fitness in the water, that's how you want to do it. The mistake that I made in my first couple of years in the sport is thinking that just getting fit in the water is going to do the job. I really struggled. I put a lot of effort into swimming in the early part of my triathlon career and just didn't feel like I was getting out what I was putting in. And then I went and hired a swim coach to, videotape me and analyze my technique and make some adjustments. And I swear I improved more in the next week after that one session than I had in 3 years up to that point. And that was pretty eye-opening because I had the fitness, it was all there, but I just wasn't going to get any better until I got more efficient. So, you want to train the right way. You want to build fitness in swimming the right way, but you don't want to put it all on that. You really want to focus on technique as well.
Right.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask with swimming, and I mean, this might be giving away a little bit of the stuff that's in the book here, but I mean, for me, swimming is always kind of hard to gauge, I guess, intensity. And I mean, I think most people would tend to maybe do too much intensity in the pool kind of by nature because everyone goes in with like their swim sets and very little of it is just swim at a reasonable endurance pace. So how do you apply the 80-20 rule to swimming once you've kind of got the technique down?
Yeah. Well, if you, it's just a matter of, it's the same process in swimming and cycling and running. You want to plan appropriately. If you just wing it, you'll probably end up in that moderate intensity rut. So you want to, plan 80-20 weeks of swimming. It's okay if one individual workout is more intensive than that, but over the long term, you need to plan your training in such a way that it adheres to that rule. Obviously, that requires a little effort. We have hence the book. We have entire
Yeah.
training plans in there, pre-built that you can just follow, where we did the math for you. We also have, for the individual workouts, we supply intensity breakdowns for them, so it makes it a lot easier to make your own training weeks just using the plans as building blocks, because we've done at least part of the math for you in those cases. So planning is the first step, and then you have to somehow, there must be some way of monitoring so that you also execute. Heart rate doesn't work too well in the pool, but if you do like a simple fitness test to establish what your appropriate what low intensity means for you in terms of pace in the water, and moderate and high, then when you actually do your workouts, you can make sure that you are pacing yourself in the right way so that you're actually executing 80-20 in addition to merely planning it.
Right. So this is my other question about swimming too, though. Cycling and running, it's really easy to soft pedal. It's really easy to, slow to a slow jog or a walk if you have to, and still be kind of doing that sport. What do you do in swimming to like drop the intensity down if, just doing generic freestyle is, killing you and you've already slowed down as much as you can? Because a lot of beginner swimmers have that issue, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's the thing. You do have that in all three disciplines. For running, so there are certain barriers to actually doing the 80-20 thing, or actually doing something at low intensity when you intend to. In running, it's the walk-run transition. So I hear from slower runners all the time, and they say, guess what? As soon as I transition from walking to running, I'm already close to moderate intensity, just because I'm older, I'm overweight, I'm just not a super gifted runner or whatever. So that's a barrier in running. In cycling, it's hills. I'll hear from people who live in hilly areas. It's just like there's no such thing as slow enough to stay in. And then in swimming, it's the fact that less. It's a different thing, but less experienced swimmers and sometimes less fit swimmers tend to have poor technique, so that you're using more energy to go at any given. They're like barges instead of torpedoes. This was my issue. Even though I had high level of fitness when I started swimming, I would still struggle to keep my intensity down just because I was so inefficient. And you just have to, you kind of just have to do the best you can. You can mix in alternative strokes, and you also, that's all the more reason to focus on, developing your technique and getting more efficient, because the more efficient you get, the lower your physiological intensity will be at any given swim pace. So it's just, there's a learning curve. There's a little bit of bootstrapping you have to do to, get over that initial hump.
Yeah, and that might be, something where someone's treading water or, floating to sort of recover a bit, or, if it's so hard that you need to take a recovery, then it might be, they just might have to sit there for 10, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, right? And then eventually the goal is to have that continuous training.
Right.
Do you have anything else on swimming?
I'm actually just really bad at during the 20% intensity part. I would just keep everything I did at 100% endurance pace. Peter's seen me just swim for like an hour and a half. Any tips on how to make yourself actually start doing the hard work?
Yeah, that's where it's really, it's one thing to put in physical effort to your training, and it's another to put in mental effort. And there's nothing wrong with offloading the mental part to the degree you can. So, getting workouts from some other source, it could be my book. It had this thing, I forget what it's called. I used to use it a while back. It was just like this waterproof, like 3-ring binder. It was like spiral bound book where it was just full of swim workouts. So you could just take it to the pool and kind of pick one. And they include structure and variation in intensity, and so you don't have to put a lot of thought into, you just, someone does the planning part for you. You just have to go out and do the intervals. But you can get pretty close to the mountaintop, fitness wise, by doing a whole ton of low intensity training. You just can't get all the way there. So it just depends how much it matters to you. Like, I remember interviewing a professional triathlete a while back who came from a swimming background, and she was just a killer swimmer. And she just didn't feel like she wanted to do what you do. So she would just go in the pool and swim laps. And this was a top professional triathlete, and it worked just fine because she was just so damn good. She needed to keep going into the water. But I mean, I'm not saying go ahead and do that. I'm saying, like, you can get pretty darn fit. Just the volume has to be high if you're never going to go hard. But if you want to get, absolutely the most benefit you can from whatever your weekly yardage is going to be, then yeah, you have to start doing those intervals.
Yeah, for sure. Hey guys, we're just going to interrupt you for a second to talk again about the Wide Angle Podium Donor Drive. So for those of you who don't know, Wide Angle Podium is the network that our podcast is on, along with other awesome cycling-related podcasts like CX Hairs, Slow Ride Podcast, We Got to Hang Out, The Honest Bicycle, tons of other really cool ones. And the network is sort of what allows us to, keep upgrading our audio equipment, keep putting out new episodes. Hosting and all that kind of stuff is not free or cheap. So, it really takes a village to have this kind of podcast going out every single week.
Yeah, and the way I like to describe it is, we used to all pay for our cable channels. We used to all pay for all these crazy things, and, everything gets sort of cheaper, but it also gets more, specific. So you can now get the exact content. Hopefully, we're providing content. You're listening, so thank you for that. But you're getting, the content that you want. It's very specific to, the cycling you like or the sporting you like. We're not getting, really any commercials that are stupid and for, odd companies that you don't support. So
it's true. So anyway, this month we have our Wide Angle Podium Donor Drive going on. It's just going on through the end of August. And any new donors get a ton of rad bonus content. I can say it's rad because I made a lot of it.
So these are like downloadable documents. There's some extra episodes with some really cool people. There's some longer like added content that are from some of the episodes we have done. Mm-hmm. Can you give people any teasers on those?
Yeah, actually, we have one of my favorite people talking about nutrition, Matt Fitzgerald.
So we got some extra nutrition stuff.
Extra nutrition stuff.
So you're going to get faster?
Yep, extra
healthier?
Sports. Yeah, and you're going to get smarter, too, because we have Simon Marshall talking about some sports psychology.
And he was really well received. He's a great guest.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then during the donor drive, you also have access to things. There's some T-shirts, there's some pins, some stickers, some really cool stuff like that. And basically, you can donate on a sort of recurring thing, like you do with your iTunes or your cable package or whatever you're paying for monthly. And that's at lots of different levels, obviously. And you can also just do a one-time sort of annual or one-time lump sum as well.
Cool. All right. Again, that's wideanglepodium.com/donate. Any and all contributions would be greatly appreciated. And if you're already a donor, thank you so much for supporting the show. And with that said, let's get back to it.
So from there, I guess it sort of begs the question with that 80-20 then, how are we defining this, the above and below? Like, are you of the opinion that it's sort of one line that we're either above or below, or is it sort of the 3-zone system that Seiler uses, or where are you at on that in terms of this book and maybe even for the 3 sports if it's different?
Yeah, I mean, I take my cue from Stephen Seiler in that regard. There are a lot of ways to define intensity, but what Seiler found, and there's other research that tangentially supports it, is that the crucial threshold is this ventilatory threshold. So the idea is that if you start exercising at a very low intensity and gradually ratchet it up, there's a point. An intensity at which there will be an abrupt spike in your breathing rate. So at first, your breathing rate's increasing, in kind of a linear fashion, linearly, and then there will be, an uptick in the curve, and that's your ventilatory threshold. It's close to the better known lactate threshold, typically a little bit lower. And why that is crucial is that it appears like, when you cross that threshold, your brain it's kind of like flipping a switch where your brain starts recruiting a lot more type 2 muscle fibers, fast twitch muscle fibers. And the reason that's consequential is that you're suddenly, very abruptly, it is a threshold. You're challenging your nervous system, your autonomic nervous system, more than you are at any lower intensity. So just below the threshold is one thing, just above it is crucially another thing. So it's not that being above that threshold is bad. It's just, it's more stressful. And the time it takes to recover from training, again, even just slightly above that threshold, which is not a high intensity, it's a moderate intensity. It takes a lot longer to recover, and you can't handle nearly as much of it. You can't benefit from as much of it. So that's the threshold. Really, you want to, in terms of like truly optimizing your training, you want to target your speed or pace or intensity to the specific structure of each workout. So, for me in running, there are times when I would want to run 5:45 per mile and not 5:50 and not 5:40. You want to dial it in that much, but stepping back from that sort of precision, if there's only one thing you want to pay attention to, it's that ventilatory threshold, and just make sure you're below it 80% of the time.
Now, to cross-reference that then, for someone, maybe swimming or running with pace, like that's like generally that endurance pace or that 80% pace is going to be, something that you can do for like well over an hour. Would you agree with that? Or like, marathon pace and under type thing? Or is there any sort of linear lines we can draw in that sense?
Or does it depend on what kind of race you're training for?
No, it's physiology. So, it's in, the threshold is the threshold regardless of what you're training for. Obviously it'll move as your fitness level changes, but because it is typically in the typical athlete a little bit below the lactate threshold, the typical trained endurance athlete can sustain their lactate threshold pace for about an hour, 55 minutes to an hour. So your ventilatory threshold, you could sustain longer than that, but not a ton longer than that. So that's what you're looking at, maybe like an 80-minute sustainable effort, that type of thing.
Right. And I think you throw like the number sort of 75% max heart rate might be another sort of rough, if we're just trying to sort of paint rough ways that you might sort of isolate this line we're trying to stay underneath. 75% max heart rate might be another approximation there. Yeah,
I think 77 is the number I get. But
right.
Horseshoes and hand grenades.
Well, it's not 90%. I think is the
right.
The big.
Right. Yes.
And now, what about on the flip side? Like if I'm doing a lot of my endurance running or riding at 65%, is that still that's still fine, or does it? I guess it depends on time of year and stuff like that too. But that would definitely put it in that 80% bucket, right?
Yes. So I find myself telling athletes all the time, because really it's tough to get people. I mean, it hasn't been said in this interview yet, but it's worth saying that almost everyone does it wrong. Like almost everyone who trains as an endurance athlete is stuck in, this moderate intensity rut where they're actually at moderate intensity. They're actually above the ventilatory threshold when they think they're doing their easy training. So wait a minute, I forgot what the question was.
Knowing me, there probably wasn't one, but
Not
it was
really.
essentially there's a zone. So there's endurance zone. So zone 1s and 2 maybe for some people, depending on how they're describing their intensity. It's okay to be at 65% of max.
Right. Yes. The question I was answering was, is there such a thing as too slow? So because almost everyone is making this mistake, I tend to be putting the brakes on people. Yeah. And so I will say to them, there's no such thing as too slow. Well, there is such a thing as too slow, but it's effective messaging. But you're pretty much not going to build any fitness unless you're above about 60% of your maximum heart rate.
Right.
And so you've got this room to play with, like 60 to 77%. And one might think, oh, well, if that's the range, then don't I want to be close to the 77% as much as possible? And the answer to that question is no, not necessarily. I think that as long as you're below that threshold, the physiological adaptations you're going to get from spending time there are more or less the same. And then I think it's important to, on any given day, to choose your specific spot within the low intensity range, just based on how far you're going to be out, how long you're going to be out there, how you're feeling. If you're tired from yesterday's interval workout and you just feel like crap at 75%, then you're going to do more benefit. You're going to get more benefit by just dialing it back. So yeah.
Yeah, and there's a lot of individual variation, but definitely people often, like you say, will go out and ride the limit rather than the range. And they get to a hill, so then they blow over the limit. And then the other, like, these are all physiological, like, estimates, right? Like, I'm saying 75 and you're saying 77. Yeah. And then on one day, for one person, it could be 79 or whatever. So my thought was always, why not leave a little bit of room there just so we're not dipping into that next zone or that middle ground or whatever, right? And save that extra effort and extra mental effort for that 20% day, the intensity day.
Yeah. I have a post that I wrote on my 80/20 endurance blog. I think the title of the post is something like why your easy run pace should vary wildly from day to day. And it's right. It's precisely on this issue.
And this is a runner, like an often runner. Oh, cyclists are bad with, I guess all three are bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have your pace in swimming, your 200 watts in cycling for endurance every day for every single athlete. 200 watts is endurance.
Right.
What?
Yep. Every single athlete.
I would like to have a talk about this.
Yeah. So anyhow, sorry, your post.
Anyway.
Yeah. So I just, I think, because, when you're trying to train well, you're trying to make predictions. It's like, well, here's just, we'll go with runners just to make it simple again. Like, here's the number of miles that I want to run. And, here are my workout days. And then you kind of but these things are all predictions, like, I think this is the right number of miles. Like, I think this is the intensity I can handle. And then you just go do it. And invariably, it doesn't matter how experienced or how knowledgeable you are, you're going to get some surprises in the training process. And the most frequent surprise you get is just feeling great on some days when you expected not to or didn't expect to, and feeling lousy on days when you didn't necessarily expect that. And so I think part of getting the most out of your training is being responsive to how you feel. There are people who just want to reduce everything to a formula. And I realize the title of my book is a formula, but it's not all about that. Like, you really have to sort of, how you feel is crucial information. So, I tell people, like, when you're out there doing, an easy run or an easy ride, or even, a long run or ride or swim that's supposed to be at low intensity, listen to how you feel, and you should be comfortable. Like, those are days where just, step back from the numbers a bit and just adjust your effort so that you feel good. Mm-hmm. And I think if you do that consistently, you're going to get more out of the training process.
Yeah, and Molly and I were just talking about this the other day. Like, my favorite part of training is going on long rides and runs and just having conversations with people for, hours. And Molly was saying how she's not had as much of those experiences.
I have with running. It's harder with cycling to find.
Yeah, which is maybe an ability base, not ability, but like once you can go quickly and
there's a look
I don't know. I'm digging
myself. Right now.
I'm digging myself a hole, but but I think a lot of people are missing that experience because every single ride they're smashing each other or themselves on their own in the basement or something. And not getting that just like low, as you say, I think your mental energy or mental sort of fatigue part of it, just get on, pedal lightly. And then what are you going to be like when you come back for those Tuesday intervals or whatever day?
Right.
So we've just been talking about what I think you refer to as intensity blindness, but there are some other barriers to being able to do the 80-20 training method. So I was wondering if you could maybe chat about one or two of your favorites of those.
Like
Yeah.
habits, stumbling blocks.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because when I was planning this book, in some ways it was like a second shot at the first one, and so I thought about, okay, what are things that I want to do differently or hit, to sort of dig deeper with, and one of them was this concept of barriers. It's like why don't people follow the 80-20 rule? And so what I started to regret, so I said I'm going to do a chapter where I just list these barriers, because I felt it's helpful if you see them before you go and make all the mistakes, right? Mm-hmm. But then I thought there are so many of them, this could be demoralizing to people, because I came up with 8, sort of 8 things, obstacles that are standing in the way of like actually doing this. We've touched on a couple of them already. One that I think it's, people would recognize in this day and age is like the ego factor, which, things like Strava or playing into, when it's one thing to be, out on the road and you get passed by another cyclist and you kind of hate that a little bit. But when everyone's sort of posting their data and sharing it and everyone can see it, and it's all suddenly you're just being ranked, all across the world. It was just like, hey, I just went out for an hour ride. It's like, what? How did I lose? I feel like I lost the race. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so, we all, it is a sport. We're all competitive. And so that is a factor that pushes us to stay in the moderate intensity rut, the ego factor. Another one is just it's counterintuitive. So the buy-in is tough. I deal with this with the athletes I coach all the time. It's hard to get people to believe in their bones that slowing down can make them faster. Mm-hmm. And that's a big one. There's a quote I include in this chapter from a legendary Czech runner from back in the middle of the last century. And he said, why should I train slow to get fast? I know how to run slow. and that is intuitive, right? It's like, well, the idea when you race is to go as fast as you can. So like, why shouldn't I push it in training all the time? It's like, that makes a lot more sense than the idea of having to hold yourself back. And yet, ultimately, you want to do what actually works, whether it's intuitive or not.
Yeah, for sure. So I also wanted to talk about, so you have all different training plans for different lengths of race from sprint to Ironman. How does the whole 80-20 training thing differ between the different, length of discipline, I guess?
Right, yeah. So, getting back to this notion of intuitive and counterintuitive, you might think, like a sprint triathlon is for Joe triathlete, maybe an hour and 15-minute race, and an Ironman is a 12-hour race. So you might think, well, 80-20 can't apply to both. You know what I mean? Like, one of them is the race is a lot longer and it's a lot lower intensity. Mm-hmm. So you don't want to train exactly the same way. You do, however, want to train 80-20 for both. It's just that if you're training for a sprint, more of that 20% should be high intensity versus moderate, because the 20 and 80-20 encompasses both moderate and high. It's everything except low. Whereas in an Ironman training, it's still 20%, and because you're probably doing higher volume, it's more time above low intensity, but you want a greater portion of that 20% to actually be at moderate versus high intensity. So that's how you sort of adapt the 80-20 principle to different race distances.
Yeah, and I've seen a few studies and stuff come out now and sort of surmise that maybe the threshold is sort of like, if you look at all these old journals and stuff and you look at them based on the race intensity, the race pace, and sort of time under and over it, is another way to sort of look at that sort of threshold between the two. Would you say that sort of makes sense with what you're saying, or are you saying still the thresholds, like, I guess you're talking about a range of thresholds anyhow, but like, is there something to that idea, I guess, that the Ironman threshold would be lower, I guess?
Well, not exactly, because I mean, I think if you took that approach, it could lead you to do kind of the opposite of what I was saying, to actually in a sprint, you're going to be, you could have 0% low intensity in a sprint. I mean, the whole thing, you're moderate to high.
Right.
So that could lead you down the wrong path, to look at that. You want to do 80-20 for both, and your ventilatory threshold is physiological, so it's not going to be different depending on, you could sign up for a sprint and then change your mind the next day and sign up for an Ironman. That doesn't change your ventilatory threshold. So, you want to be, just because you change your mind and you're going to do a race that, is going to take 5-6 times longer to finish, you still want to do about 80% of your training below the ventilatory threshold. It's just, if you're switching your focus to an Ironman, all of a sudden you're going to want to do more volume and a greater fraction, or a greater proportion of your non-low intensity time is going to be at moderate versus high intensity.
Right. Okay. So it maybe lowers the top limit there if you think about the 3-zone system.
It's just if you put it in the terms of the specific zone system I use, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 with gaps between a couple of the pairs that we now label X and Y. So moderate intensity begins in the gap between zones 2 and 3. So X, which is that first gap, is sort of technically moderate intensity. You avoid it most of the time. 3 is moderate intensity. 4 and 5 are high. So if you're training for a sprint, you're going to want to do a fair amount of zone 4 and zone 5. If you're training for an Ironman, you're going to want to do less of zone 4 and 5 and more of zones X and 3, which are moderate versus high. They're all above the ventilatory threshold. You're just so that's really just to.
I think that makes sense. I think overlaying them over the 5 zones, that probably is helpful for people trying to sort of squeeze out what that's all about and how to decide.
Okay, so from a super practical standpoint, for measuring intensity in all 3 disciplines, what is the best way to do it? Is it heart rate for running? Is it power on the bike? Is it I don't even know, in swimming? Perceived exertion? What's the ideal here?
They all have pros and cons. I mean, it's a big conversation.
Yeah.
For example, perceived exertion is the only one you can't shut off. And it seems so squishy, right? It's like, well, how do I measure that? Like, there's the Borg scale, but that's subjective. And so there's especially the scientific minded types might dismiss it. Perceived exertion. Well, guess what? You race by perceived exertion. Mm-hmm. It gets the final say in how fast you can go. It doesn't matter what your power zones are. Like, if you can't do it on the day, you can't do it. And you can't do it because you don't feel like you can do it. Perceived effort. So it's crucial. And also for things like short intervals, where your heart rate's going to be climbing throughout, a 1 minute zone 5 interval. Heart rate's useless because, even if you do the whole thing at a true zone 5 intensity, your heart rate's not going to show that until maybe the very end. So in order to pace that effectively, it's really, really helpful to be able to rely on perceived effort. So there's a place for all of these metrics. They all have pros and cons. The major con with perceived exertion is the aforementioned intensity blindness factor, where if I take the typical triathlete and say, go out and run for 45 minutes at low intensity, they'll go out and run for 45 minutes at moderate intensity and tell me they did exactly what they said. So you need to calibrate perceived exertion. On the bike, I love power. Power is great. Not everyone can afford a power meter, but it's super useful. I find that heart rate it has lots of limitations, but it tends to be more effective at holding athletes back because it's not a performance metric. If you're going out and riding the bike and what your normal wattage is, but you're just a little tired that day, because it's a performance metric you're looking at, you're going to want to force it a little bit, right? It's like, oh, I'm having a bad day. I don't want to put up a bad number. Whereas heart rate, it's like there's no good heart rate or bad heart rate,
right.
So athletes who really need to have the brakes put on them, heart rate is really useful for that. Pace, a lot of runners, people who grew up running like me, you breathe pace. Just pace is the only thing that makes sense to a lot of people who come from running backgrounds, but it goes out the window on hills. If you have to make adjustments for heat, altitude, all kinds of things. So it's best, that's why we go into some depth in the book, just saying, like, spelling them out, like, here's the pros, here are the cons, here are the limitations, here are the best uses. And it's, usually best to, kind of rely on a mix.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. All right. Where can everyone find you? Where can everyone get all of your books? Pimp yourself out.
Yeah. So my personal website is mattfitzgerald.org. And then I referenced earlier my 80-20 endurance website, which has a ton of resources related to that whole concept for runners and triathletes, and that's 8020endurance.com.
Awesome. And then you're Matt Fitwriter on Twitter too.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, as always, Matt, it was a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat, and I'm very excited about this new book. Hey guys, before you take off, we just wanted to jump on here and talk a little bit about the Wide Angle Podium donor drive that's going on this August. So Wide Angle Podium is a member-supported network. They have tons of awesome shows, in addition to us, obviously. We have the Slow Ride podcast, there's Crosshairs, so many other really cool cycling-specific podcasts. I think we might be the only non-cycling-specific one on the network, so it's pretty rad that they let us, hang out with them.
Yeah, it's definitely a conglomerate.
That makes it sound like they're in some kind of like skyscraper building and
no, in fact it's quite different. It's all just regular people who are talking and trying to get people like Katie Compton, or we just had Chris McDougall today that you just listened to, and it's bringing this content that hopefully is very near and dear to your heart, whether you're a cyclist or something like that. It's very specific, right? And that's this day and age. We're not paying NBC for our cable package. I mean, you've cut the cord. You're not paying for cable anymore. Who does that? So it's really now, you pay maybe Apple for your $10 Apple Music, and then
Netflix?
Maybe you're Netflixing and chilling. I don't know what you choose to do with your own time, but that would be an option. And then, maybe some YouTube in there. And then you got your Wide Angle Podium, right? So you're getting your podcast, and it's a very specific show, right? There's no more channel surfing. You know that these, five different shows maybe you listen to as a cyclist, or, maybe you listen to us for sort of this all-around stuff, and then maybe you have like another show that you listen to that's about something else, like dogs or something. But slowly our show is merging into a dog show.
I was going to say. Anyway, though, if you end up supporting Wide Angle Podium, which you can do if you go to wideanglepodium.com/donate, you not only get to help out shows like ours, you also get some sick bonus content. We actually put a lot of time this summer into recording a couple of bonus episodes with some pretty high-level people about some pretty cool topics. We put together a couple handouts and PDFs as well, so you get bonus content from us as well as from all of the other podcasts. So really,
It should be a
good
lot,
stuff.
right? Like
yeah.
we put in 3 or something. Is that what it was?
This year we have
For
3 episodes.
But there's but I imagine all the older stuff is in there too, and there was some really good stuff from last year and the year before too.
Yep, and yeah, like I said, a couple new handouts with some of the stuff that we talk about on the show kind of put into, here's like an easy way to put this stuff into practice. So yeah, it's really great if you can help support us and the network. We will be forever grateful. You will be our best friends. Cross is coming, so you're probably going to see us at some races. So how great would it be to get to come up and be like, hey, I support your show. I would give you some stickers then, probably some Shred Girls swag if you.
I was wondering what you were going to offer on top. I'm like, hey, be careful. What if this goes really well?
I'll buy you lunch if you're like one of the highest donors.
Beers for everyone. Molly Herford.
You know what? If you support the show with over $20 a month, I will buy you a beer at the next cross race.
I mean, I think if there's
no problem.
I think at
any level,
they still have to find you, right? So what
That's
are the
true.
chances that this is going to backfire?
I feel like at Gloucester, I'm going to lose a lot of money.
Yeah, but how much does a beer actually cost? I mean,
At Gloucester?
if someone gives to you and you give back, and then you have a beer, I feel like that was like meant to happen. I will spend on that beer. That's it. I'm offering the beer now.
There we go. If you donate, screenshot the email that says you're donating. Find one of us at a cross race, and we will buy you a beer.
You don't think
Done.
we can do this unless we'll just trust them?
No, I want a screenshot.
Oh, and they're gonna have to bring a piece of paper too?
No, just their phone.
Oh,
The screenshot.
yeah.
Of the
I guess you can do that now. You've cut the cord. You got into the cloud.
Come on, I'm just saying. All right, do that. We'll buy you a beer. You'll make our day. Anyway,
So
wideanglepodium.com.
Bonus content. We got bonus content.
All right.
I'm really wondering. I want to know what the bonus content is for like the crosshairs, and they probably have some really good stuff. Because this last episode they just did, we talked about that last show. I thought that was like one of the best things I've ever listened to.
Well, now
Peter
you're just giving it away
Sagan.
for free.
No. This is just the show they did. But they had Peter.
No, they didn't.
I made up Peter Sagan. That was just hype. But I mean, obviously they have Peter Sagan as the bonus content. I mean,
Maybe. I don't know.
I mean, I don't know. I'm not promising that. That's not my show. But who did they have on that was amazing and I was
They
excited
had
about?
Matthew Vanderpool.
I mean, that's just like Peter Sagan.
Okay.
Although they also developed hype, I think, around the fact that Peter Sagan doesn't know who Vanderpool is or something.
You're getting really into the weeds here, dear.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Filibuster?
wideanglepodium.com/donate. Do it and we'll buy you a beer. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Thanks so much for tuning into the Consummate Athlete podcast. You can check out my stuff over at theoutdooredit.com or by following me on Instagram and Twitter at Molly J. Herford. And you can check out Peter's coaching, training plans, blogs, all that fun stuff over at smartathlete.ca or by following him on Twitter and Instagram at Peter Glassford. And if you want to support this show and other awesome podcasts, please check out wideanglepodium.com for show info, other podcasts, bonus content, and to become a donating member so you can get all of that rad behind the scenes content and help keep shows like this on the air. And lastly, if you're enjoying this podcast and all the information that we're bringing to you every single week, do us a solid and pop into iTunes to leave us a rating and review. It takes you about 2 seconds. You can do it on your computer, you can do it on your phone, and it really helps us out. Thanks so much, and we will see you next week.